What's happening, guys? James Blonde here with MMOHuts.com. This time taking a first look at Albion Online, a new Sandbox MMORPG from none other than Sandbox Interactive. Now, this game is all about crafting, exploring, and gathering resources for your player housing, as well as gearing up for PvP battles. There are no class restrictions, and you craft your own gear, selecting your abilities associated with each piece of gear, and I'll show you how that works later on. Now, this game also runs on the Unity engine, meaning that it's completely cross-platform compatible, so you'll be able to play on PC, Mac, and Linux, as well as iOS and Android, with all players in-game on one master server, which is definitely something I'm always up for. But as of now, the game is still in an alpha state of development with only one way to get in, which is through the Founders Pack, so hopefully we can snag you guys access sooner or later in one of our giveaways. But for now, I'll hop into the game and show off some of the major features. Okay, so for now there isn't much in terms of character customization, but really, because this is a sandbox crafting MMO, most of your customization is going to come from crafting your gear. So once you start doing that, you'll be able to differentiate yourself from other players. Plus, as you can see here, they've got plenty of different races planned for the future, but for now, out of the 6 they plan to have, only the human is available. And something also gives me the feeling that each race could possibly have some sort of unique racial attributes, but that is something we may have to look forward to. From here, you choose your avatar. This is just based on preference. If you get the higher tier Founders Packs, you actually get more exclusive avatars, which look pretty cool. Otherwise, you've got these 6 to choose from, and of course the same thing goes for female. You've got the choice of male and female. You've got the 6 different options here as well. You've got several tones for the skin color you can choose from. Between this and the hair color is about as much variety as you get with the initial character customizations. You only have 3 options for hair as well. You got 1, 2, and bald. The first one actually looks like a hat more than hair, honestly. A few different options on the beard, and then you get to choose your underwear and its color, because this is actually what you see yourself in once you die and you're running around the woods naked trying to stay alive to get back to your stash of extra gear. If you remember to stash extra gear, that is. Hint, hint. So I was actually impressed how intuitive the game was right off the bat. There really isn't any tutorial, so to speak, but you do have these missions listed at the bottom center here that guide you, in a sense, when you have no idea what you should be doing next. Which is nice, because sometimes it can be a problem in a sandbox game, you know, the sense of direction. When I first played Minecraft, I kept wondering, like, what am I supposed to be doing here again? I know I'm supposed to survive, but what am I supposed to do first? So I like how this game uses these missions in order to set you on a path, and then once you get the idea, you naturally take over and the missions sort of turn into an achievement system rather than a questing system or a guide. Plus, once you complete these, it allows you to advance your proficiencies, which is a huge part in this game and a way to progress. So the game doesn't exactly have a leveling system, but you do have this giant proficiency tree called the Destiny board that you can guide yourself through in order to still get a good form of progression in the game. Now, clearly the way you start to progress is by gathering resources to start out, and just like in EQ Next Landmark and a lot of other resource gathering games, there are different tiers of resources and gear you can craft. And of course, you have to make your way through one tier in order to get to the next, so some of the first missions this game has you do is gather wood and stone, which are basic tier 1 resources. And just like in Minecraft, starting out you don't actually need tools at basic tiers to gather them. You just sort of, punch wood and punch stone, and that works. And see, after gathering the wood and the stone there, I gained a beginner wood and stone gathering as a proficiency. You do this until you reach Novice Adventurer after crafting the beginner's pickaxe. Then you start to branch out from there, like you can see right here in the Destiny board. But before you get to Novice Adventurer, you have to start crafting a few tools, a piece of armor, and a beginner's sword, and this is pretty much all you get as a starting guide, minus following the missions anyway. But really that's all you need, because you quickly figure out what NPCs do what and how to craft items, like this basic skinning knife, for example, and you use it to skin a rabbit to make your first piece of armor. Oh man, that noise though. That's immersive game sounds right there. Anyway, the cool thing when it comes to crafting armor and weapons is that you can actually choose the abilities, whether they be active or passive, that goes along with them. So, like, for this first piece of armor here, which I apparently made out of rabbit skin, I've got 2 spell slots, and for the first one I can choose either Regrowth or Wither, which Wither ignites enemies within an AoE and does damage over time, or Regrowth, which will grant me health and mana, or energy rather, over time. Now the second one here gives me an option to either increase my movement speed or my attack speed. The attack speed here is a better percentage, so probably go with that. The same thing goes with weapons. On this beginner sword, I've got 3 spell slots this time, with even more options in each slot. I've got the option for a dash that, well, it's a dash. It's pretty self-explanatory. I can pick Reduce Armor, which deals decent damage and then debuffs the enemy's magic and physical armor for 5 seconds. I kind of like the way that sounds. Or I can choose to increase my physical and magic armor. I think I'm going to go with the Reduce Armor, seeing that the armor buff designed for me is actually an option here in the second spell slot, and the passive options in this case are ones that either increase my armor a little as I use my basic attack, or this one here increases my attack damage by a percentage. Now, these are not randomly generated options. These are the exact same for every piece of gear you craft of this level and type, but as you get into the higher tier gear, you obtain more options for spells, and I'm assuming even more slots for spells, especially with the armor, and whether or not you're wanting to carry a shield, for example. So the more gear you have, the more spell options you obtain that way. And once you've added these spells and you have your weapon equipped, you can see your active skills here, which are typically on Q, W, E, R, D, and I'm sure more later on as you gain more. That's pretty much all you have to worry about in terms of controls. And because this game is designed to work on so many different platforms, including tablets, hence the reason the UI is set up the way it is with the large buttons and all, the controls are actually really easy as well. So all of your movement is done with a mouse. So what you're trying to do as you get going in the game is to start by collecting tier 2 resources, obviously advancing on to tier 3 resources so you can craft those items. But the map in the game is really huge, so there are plenty of places to look for resources, but you got to keep in mind that you're not going to be the only ones looking for resources. So when you get into the higher tiers, or have to go a little further, for example, in order to find higher tier resources, you've definitely got to watch your back. Other players can come along and kill you and then get credit in doing so, as well as loot your gear afterwards. So there's actually an incentive in killing other players in this game, which is kind of cool in my opinion. It gives the game a slight hardcore element. So you can get killed by other players in designated areas, typically further away from towns though. Or you can get killed via PvE while looking for resources, because the higher tier resources are typically protected by mobs. And on top of that, the enemies themselves can actually be pretty challenging, especially if you go at it solo. You kind of have to, pull one at a time. And if you die, you have the option to respawn back at the closest town or in that general vicinity, but you only have 10 minutes to get back to your stuff before it disappears. That's if somebody hasn't looted it yet, which isn't that often in alpha, but I can imagine later on it might be a big deal. And retrieving your stuff can actually be really tough if you happen to die in the middle of a camp, because from there you're having to go back to your gear basically naked with no weapon, and I think, but I'm not sure, if you die again before reaching your stuff, it's pretty much good as gone. I mean, I haven't actually done that, because if I die like in the middle of a camp, you really can't make it back, because all it takes is one enemy and then you're done. If you do make it back to your body, then you'll notice that your gear takes a huge hit in durability when you die. And if it's already weak, then it's probably trash. So basically, try not to die, like, ever. Or at least prepare to die, as in craft extra tools of each tier if you can, and keep them in your stash back in town. Because if you die and you haven't prepared for it, it takes a little while to get back to where you were in terms of progression. So when it comes to the stash here, you can hold a lot of stuff, but each town has its own stash, and it's not shared between them. So if you store anything here, this is actually where you have to come back to in order to find it again. So if you've got a lot of resources you've harvested, this is where you're going to want to stockpile them until, you build a house or a guild hall, because then you construct furniture that allows you to store it that way. Besides that, the game also has a weight mechanic, whereas if you're carrying too much, your character starts to walk really slow. To the point that if you have too much, you can't actually move, and then you're forced to not drop, but actually trash some items in order to move again. Plus, other players can obviously see you moving slow, so if you're weighted down, you're a potential target for any player who wants a lot of free resources really quick. But naturally, there are ways around this. So later on, you can get a mount that not only helps you with your travel speed, but also allows you to carry a lot more weight, especially the ox. Plus, one of the gear items that you can craft is a bag that doesn't necessarily determine the size of your inventory, but rather the weight you can carry, which is a really, really nice feature. And I'm so glad that this isn't a cash shop item in terms of expansion. And as I was saying earlier, as you advance through the various tiers, you get to a point at tier 3 where you start to require more types of resources to craft items, with resources that require refining first, and then on top of that you have to pay silver in order to craft them, plus these resources that you may have to use to craft require refining themselves, which in turn requires silver to refine. So the challenge to gather resources and craft items gets exponentially more difficult and expensive as you advance, and the way you have to get silver is by killing the human-like mobs, by finding them in camps, in the forest, or looking for dungeons which show up on your map, kind of like this. And most of the time you get lots of silver in these dungeons, but at the same time you spend a lot trying to craft new gear. And from what I've noticed, as you gain access to higher tier resources and gear, the unofficial level of the enemies starts to scale up. Mainly because if you're finding, for example, tier 3 resources, you'll start to run into tier 2 and then tier 3 mobs. So you're better off having a tier 3 weapon in order to fight them with if you can. Or, you know, bring friends and don't hunt alone. It's a lot easier to farm as a team, but the main rule is to only pull one enemy at a time if you can. That, and always spam your heals if you've decided to use those as your spell, which I highly recommend because it's really nice being able to do that. Now, one of the other hazards I've noticed is when you're in areas where you need to harvest higher tier resources, you're typically surrounded by enemies like we talked about before. You've got to manually unequip your weapon and switch over to the tool to harvest whatever resources accordingly. Now, right now they have a hotkey Q to immediately switch back over to your weapons from whatever tool you're using. However, you have to initially wait for all of your cooldowns in order to use your abilities. So if you aggro a wolf, for example, you might have to start fighting it with just your basic attack until you gain access to all your skills again. And once again, there are dungeons in this game that are really effective ways to get silver, and silver is something that you have to have in higher tier resources in order to craft things and pay taxes, for example. And I haven't quite reached them yet, but the dungeons also have bosses with boss mechanics that you have to deal with, which is probably another way of getting a huge amount of silver, or items like this, for example, that are rare but are also required to craft certain weapon types. And speaking of, seeing that the game has no classes, if you get tired of playing with the sword and shield, you could easily switch over to the staff and bow just by gathering what you need to craft them. Now, not only does the game have player housing, but it also lets you start building your own city, so to speak. As in, you're able to build all of the NPC workstations that you use to craft pretty much everything in the game. And seeing that the game has a player set economy, you can even set a tax rate. So when players use your buildings to craft or refine, you get royalties in silver, which is a really cool system. There's so many different buildings that you can place down. This basically replaces the user-generated building content found in other games like Trove or Landmark, for example. That's a whole other half of the game. And it all starts like this. If you search the map for a plot of land, and once you have enough resources to buy it, you can start by placing down construction sites for building. And that's, from there, is when you have to go out and find all the resources necessary to complete the construction. Plus a lot of silver, of course, which means a lot of killing stuff. So the late game offers a lot when it comes to building housing and ways to drive your player economy. You could build guild halls, all kinds of stuff. So if you want to do that, it's kind of like Arcade in that sense. You play the game how you want, but if you want to have player housing and some of the late game stuff, then you've got to, you know, stick with that direction and keep with it. You've got to pay your taxes and things like that. Now, as far as PvP goes, we already know that you can get PK'd in non-safe areas, but seeing that you can join guilds, you also have guild versus guild territory control battles. So that's something the game offers, even though this game is still in alpha. I'm not really sure what's in store for the future, honestly. There's already a lot of content here. But as of right now, there isn't a cash shop, nor do I think there will be, because instead, it seems to be set up with a gold system that takes the place of silver that you buy with real currency. So no pay-to-win elements here. Just pay not to have to grind for silver, basically. And not everything you can skip by using gold, so you still have to grind through a lot of it, just like everybody else. And so overall, I was rather impressed with the game. It offers a really cool sandbox experience, including a classless system with no leveling, but still has some progression to it, along with a challenge that can nearly make the game hardcore if you're not careful, on a cross-platform, united mega server, without sacrificing what you really want or normally expect out of a complete sandbox MMORPG, like open world PvP or guild versus guild warfare or player housing even. And yeah, the graphics look a little bit like RuneScape or Strife, but that's also what allows them to make the game playable on tablets. especially the Android ones. Either way, the game is addicting, and when it's launched, it'll be very easily accessible, which is cool. So not everybody's going to want to play it on a tablet, but if you do, well, then you have that option. Hopefully we can get you guys access to the game sooner rather than later, but until then, if you're looking for more information about the game, head over to the MMOHuts game profile from the link in the description below. Thanks for watching, guys, and until next time, that's going to be it for me. I'm James Blonde. See you out there, gamers.